Good afternoon, folks. We are just waiting on more people joining the session, and we'll kick off in a couple of minutes' time. Many thanks. To those that have just joined us, good afternoon. Thanks very much for joining today's webinar. We are just going to give it a couple of minutes to allow everyone to join the call, and we'll get started in about 2 minutes' time. Many thanks. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're still waiting on a few people, expecting a few people to join, but we'll get started. So thank you very much for joining today's webinar on strategies to attracting and retaining top talent. Today's webinar is in partnership with Connect3, and I'll introduce you to today's presenter in just a second. My name's Alistair Gillen, Growth and Inward Investment Manager at Skills Development Scotland, and thank you once again for everybody coming on. Just a wee bit of housekeeping to begin with. We will be recording today's session, so anyone who is unable to join today's call, or if you want to share the presentation with them at some point, then you can do so at a later date. It will be hosted on Employer Hub, Skills Development Scotland's website. As you'll notice, your cameras and microphones have been switched off, so that's just to ensure the kind of flow of today's presentation. However, we would like to encourage you to engage in today's presentation. You'll see at the top of your screen, and there is a Q&A function. At any point during today's session, if you wish to pose any questions, looking to clarify any points that have maybe made, then can encourage you to use that just by posting in it. You'll see that the chat function is disabled again, just to ensure the flow of today's presentation. So if you could encourage you to use the Q&A function, Neil is quite happy to be stopped during today's session. If there's any questions that come up at any point, then I can interrupt him and kind of field those questions to him, and there'll be time built in at the end of the session in order to cover any points that are raised. The slides, we will share them at the end of the session as well. We'll get that round, along with looking for some evaluation as well. So just to get your thoughts on today's session or any other sessions you have, maybe any webinars that you have attended. So without any further ado, I will pass you over to my colleague Neil Ferguson from Connect 3. Neil is Senior HR Consultant and Account Manager at Connect 3. Got a real passion for working with SMEs in order to achieve their objectives, particularly through engagement and development of their people. So I'll pass it over to Neil. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Alistair, and hi everyone. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. So, as Alistair so articulately put it, today's session around strategies for attracting and retaining top talent. Just to continue on, tell you a little bit more about myself and why I'm speaking on this subject matter today. So I have worked in HR for about 15 years, and the vast majority of that has been spent supporting small and medium-sized businesses as an outsourced HR consultant. I joined Connect 3 just in November of last year and was fortunate enough to be able to continue supporting organisations across a whole range of industries and sectors with their outsourced HR requirements. A lot of that has included recruitment and selection, as well as every kind of area and touch point in the employee life cycle. So just to give you a little bit of background to myself, as Alistair said, they're Senior HR Consultant and Account Manager at Connect 3. And who are Connect 3? Well, we are an organisational development consultancy, and we really have a key mission to change and improve the way people run businesses and ultimately make the world a better place to live and to work. We've got kind of three key arms to the organisation, if you like, or three key service offerings. People and culture, working with organisations, really supporting them with improving or establishing what their culture is and their values, diversity and inclusion support, wellbeing, and outsourced HR support, which is where I head up for the organisation. And we do a lot of learning and development and leadership management skills development for organisations. And the kind of third key offering is innovation and growth. So working with organisations on their strategy, on sustainability and ESG and in areas like that, and in technology and particularly AI and how they might be able to adopt those sorts of things to improve the organisation. And today's session, a kind of topic that was chosen, I think, because we've seen such, a wide shift from the pandemic on how people work, where people work, that competitive candidate market that we hear so much about, and trying to secure and retain the right people and the right talent, and how that can become ultimately a bit of a game changer for the organisations that have an organised recruitment and retention strategy versus those who perhaps don't. We see such a difference now in the way what people's expectations are of their employer and the workplace, and so just trying to be cognizant of all these different things is going to produce great results for your engagement and ultimately unlock growth for the organisation. So Skills Development Scotland and Connect 3, lots of inquiries from organisations and clients around this area, so it was a natural selection for us to choose this topic to talk about today. Really a session looking to provide you with some key takeaways, some thoughts, some suggestions, some things that I've seen work well or worked with clients and work well. Obviously, you'll take that away and apply it to your own specific organisation and your own context that you're working under. But really, we're trying to just identify some ways we can streamline and improve recruitment and selection processes, enhance talent retention through areas like, positive culture, how we get that across in our messaging for recruitment and selection, providing talent development pathways and how to successfully onboard new people to the organisation and how key that is to essentially their ongoing retention with the organisation. So some key areas we'll move through. A little bit around role mapping and skills identification, so really taking a step back when a vacancy arises or an opportunity presents itself to recruit, and thinking about the whole picture of that, thinking about the skills and experience that are going to add value to your organisation, thinking about advertising and where that needs to be and how to go about doing that, and how to again present your organisation in the best way that's going to find those candidates that are going to be the top talent and are really going to make a difference to your organisation, and how you go about presenting your organisation as a great place to work for them. a little around the kind of selection processes, a few methods, a few considerations, that employer branding that I've just touched on and the importance of that, as well as more generally the things that a positive working culture is going to bring. And we'll talk a little around the actual onboarding, so thinking about when an offer is made through to somebody starting with the organisation and beyond, quite critically, how to really embed somebody and set them up for success for the organisation and for the individual, and just a little on talent development and progression pathways therein. So, kicking off with the kind of role mapping and skills identification. If a new post is identified, whatever the trigger for that has been, if it's somebody leaving or if it's a new market that's emerging or new opportunities or investment, when you want to take a step back and just think about, what are the key objectives of that role, what are the essential and desirable skills and attributes for the successful candidate, thinking right to the end point, really aligning what the role objectives are with the overall strategic business objectives and where those two kind of fit in. And as I've said, just taking a step back rather than just firing out the same job advert that you used last time, if it is a backfill, really thinking about what that successful and ideal candidate looks like. Might well be more of the same, but just kind of trying to avoid that automatically rinse and repeat of what's gone on before. You've got different scenarios at different levels you're going to be recruiting for within your organisation, or if it's at senior leadership level, managerial, more entry level, if it's a subject matter expert. You're doing a lot on early careers right now, so things like graduates and apprenticeships and those sorts of areas. And you're going to think about different strategies for attracting and retaining those candidates in different ways. So a few things we see kind of missed often is just taking that time to think these things through, actually speaking to colleagues, managers, people within the team, and thinking about how that will help just define and refine what the requirements of the role are, thinking about what the outputs for that role will be and how those will be kind of measured, what good's going to look like and what success will look like, and where we'll know if there's kind of shortcomings within that. And using all of that information to really create the comprehensive job profile that's going to then inform what the advertising strategy is for that post. And we'll come on to that shortly. So that role, that kind of candidate profile, that role profile, key steps to think about. So considering both the technical expertise and the soft skills, this isn't necessarily just about a qualification or a particular experience that an individual might have from previous roles or from qualifications that they've undertaken. It's thinking more around, what sort of interactions are they going to have with people inside the organisation, with people outside the organisation. Are they going to need to influence others? Are they managing others? Are they working completely autonomously, or are they part of a bigger team, working through projects, and just really honing in on, well, what are the kind of skills, experiences and attributes of the type of individual that you're looking for to conduct those sorts of responsibilities and communications and touch points. Thinking about where your existing team sits and what's going to complement and enhance the capabilities of the existing team. So actually thinking about maybe where the gaps exist, not just again from that technical perspective, but also from the kind of softer side of things and the capabilities therein. So what sort of person is going to complement and strengthen that existing team dynamic, and really thinking about diversity here, and we'll come on to that a little bit later, but that's your kind of goal here, to create a diverse team that's got lots of different perspectives feeding into it, lots of experiences, getting creative ideas, and not just ending up with a team full of the kind of same people from the same backgrounds who are all going to have, broadly speaking, the same kind of thoughts around problem solving or new opportunities or whatever might be relevant. And that last one, it's not going to be necessarily available for every single role within the organisation, but where applicable, if you can use more data-driven insights to kind of predict success in the role. And so really looking at what outputs could be measured, or metrics you might be wise to look at what has gone before, if applicable, in that scenario, and just kind of analysing the skills and experiences that are going to feed in to really make that role a success. And again, just using that to think about where you're going to advertise your role. Which brings us nicely on to the next slide. So advertising and presenting the organisation in the right way. I think worked with lots of organisations where they just kind of use the same kind of platforms to advertise roles, irrespective of what that role requires or what it is or where it sits within the organisation. It's chucking it onto LinkedIn or it's chucking it onto Indeed, and that may well be what's going to bring the success. But it's again just encouraging you to have a think about that. What sort of audience are you looking for, and where are they? How can you go and find them? Not ignoring internal capabilities and ambitions. So lots of organisations, again, will maybe a bit of an oversight not to kind of speak to their internal audience to discuss opportunities, or to be using the performance reviews to kind of understand what employees' ambitions are and where they might be interested in a sideways or an upwards move within the organisation. So, we're talking about retention today. That's always a key opportunity to retain people, is to give them, new opportunities within the existing organisation, and then perhaps you're backfilling at a more junior level, if that's relevant. So yeah, there are common routes out to kind of advertising, and it will be unique to the role and your own organisation, your industry, your sector. But just stepping back and thinking what is going to get you the best candidates applying for your role in the first place, so that you can take them through that selection process and ultimately identify the best people who are going to really add value to your organisation. So some of the channels I've mentioned there, job boards and recruitment agencies, social media, even print and industry-specific publications. That point around recruitment agencies, I think, if you do decide to engage an agency, it's about trying to partner with them on how best to find those great candidates, and they should really be partnering with you, giving you suggestions around how to best find those great candidates and what that selection process should look like, and they should be working on your behalf really to help you with that. It's not just about firing CVs at you and ultimately picking up an invoice for those services. The kind of good recruitment agencies, they want to add value to your organisation. They want to get in front of get the best candidates in front of you, and should really be happy to support you at all stages of the process. And certainly the good recruitment agencies that I've worked with, that's a principal part of their service offerings. Just kind of touched at the end there on the job posting reflecting the company culture and values, and we'll talk in a little bit more detail around that side of things shortly. But just a few things to consider when you are advertising, if you've got the opportunity to, or something to consider if you haven't done it before. Thinking about employee testimonials, positive experiences that people already within the organisation are willing to talk about. Could do little video tours or case studies around what it is to work for your organisation, and what you're offering essentially over and above the job role, and the kind of key terms and conditions that go along with that. And there'll be an opportunity to spend a bit more time on that shortly. So, thinking about how to showcase your positive working culture through recruitment and selection, and I put some ideas in here that have worked well at other clients. Just touched on there, sharing those real life examples of success stories and achievements, and just kind of trying to paint the picture for the candidate about what it would be if they were successful and if they did apply and came to work for your organisation. Consider involving other team members in the interview process, obviously not necessarily in a decision-making capacity, but what's appropriate for the role and what's appropriate for that stage in the selection process, to maybe allow them candidate to meet a few of the team and vice versa, and just kind of reflect that kind of collaborative process that you're running for your recruitment and selection. Promoting your company values and cultural attributes in job adverts and through social media and things. So again, if the audience are are looking not just at the role, but what sort of organisation are they joining. You want to be able to articulate all of that. Just giving candidates that authentic insight, as I've said there, and thinking about that at every touch point, not just at your recruitment advert, but actually as you're progressing through the different stages of your selection process, what opportunities are there to tap into some of these, and again, it just help engage those candidates throughout the selection process, so that you are leaving yourself with the best ones at the end of that in order to move forward with. I think important thing to say here on this slide, if you're looking down that list and you're thinking, oh, we don't really have some of these things in place, it's important not to try and fake it in your recruitment advertisements. Consider if you want to make some changes and implement some of these things. And, if you do, then think about the purpose for doing that. Think about a bit of a strategy for how you might implement or embed or enhance some of these areas. Get your team involved and get the discussion started really on what they feel that should look like, and get support from whoever is best placed to do so, whether that's the likes of Skills Development Scotland or other sources you have, Connect3 and organisations similar. We partner a lot of organisations on establishing what their values are, what their culture is, or they might already have something in place, but it's not necessarily lived through the organisation. So kind of doing that refresher on that and engaging the whole organisation through that journey. And it just makes such a difference to, engagement levels, retention levels, productivity, and ultimately unlocks growth within those organisations. So, just some thoughts there around showcasing culture through recruitment and selection. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section. So, selection processes. I think we've seen lots and lots of examples where these tend to be long and drawn out, and it just can disengage candidates, particularly if we're consider ourselves in a bit of a war for talent is the phrase that's used. You want to be thinking about ways in which you can best put forward and get those best candidates engaged and keep them engaged through your process, whilst making sure you're also taking them through the right stages to identify who the best ones are and set yourself up for success. So I've said there, keeping it efficient, avoiding excessive stages or long waiting periods. So if that's unavoidable, making sure you still have that touch point with your candidates to just keep them engaged with the process. Again, depending on the role and where it sits within the organisation, you're going to have different selection processes. I'm not here this afternoon to tell you exactly how to go through that stage, depending on technical requirements, seniority, that's going to inform the different stages that you need to identify the best person for your role. But do give this some thought, plan it out, map it out in terms of the sort of ideal timeline for that. You can then be upfront with the candidates about managing their expectations on how long something's going to be and communicating that quite clearly. Particularly where you might have specific tasks or kind of requirements or forms that they might be needing to fill out or assessments that you're going to ask them to undertake. Putting that in after the fact, if you maybe had an interview with them and then you're telling them that there's a whole stage of or series of different tasks for them to do. I've seen that lots of times, and I've seen that, disengage candidates and they drop out because, if they're applying for a role with your organisation, almost certainly they'll be applying for roles with other organisations, and the best candidates are going to be snapped up where efficient processes can run. And just that last point there, just something always to be front of mind, just thinking about inclusivity for all candidates. So just being kind of proactive and open with them and transparent with reasonable adjustments that might be required by certain candidates. So, just even putting that on your advert or mentioning that at various stages, or inviting the opportunity for reasonable adjustments to be requested and hopefully made, is just going to open up, your organisation and help enhance that reputation and demonstrate that inclusive culture that a potential candidate's going to come to join. So just wanted to touch on that there. Ultimately, I think it's about putting yourself in the candidate's shoes here. If you're moving slowly, you're not communicating with them, as I say, you're going to lose them. Grant. Some other thoughts just around selection processes and the different stages. Trying to think of all these things and having them front of mind. So if you are collecting CVs, application forms, whichever format that you do that on, give consideration to kind of blind sifting for your initial screening, help remove kind of unconscious bias. So essentially blind sifting is redacting of any kind of key information that might identify somebody or particular characteristics of somebody. So obviously things like name would come out, age if it's there, even things like dates in which they achieved their qualifications and things like that stripped out, and that just helps level the playing field ultimately, and helps the likelihood of underrepresented groups progressing through the different selection stages, and keeping your process objective and inclusive. Where you can, using kind of structured scoring methods to assess candidates, so whether that is interview, whether it is a technical task or otherwise, just trying to identify what the kind of metrics you might be able to apply and score consistently with whoever's involved in the selection process. And that just helps, keep that objective, identify the best candidates through those methods, and also just where you ever to be challenged on any decisions that you've made, it just helps give that kind of justification for your decision making. When you're selecting, again, it's not just thinking about the qualifications or the relevant experience. It's the kind of values and behaviours that your organisation has embedded, and making sure that you're aligning those to the candidates that you're potentially going to bring in. So you're hiring to try and complement that and enhance that, and maintaining that kind of diversity of thought and background. And lastly, I just think often overlooked, if you're asking managers to get involved in the recruitment and selection, just consider whether they have experience of doing that before. Give them some training, give them some learning on the subject matter and what your process is, or what you're seeking to achieve out of that, what your recruitment and selection strategy actually is, and involve them in that and allow them to ask questions, set them up with the tools and equip them for success. For making the selection. So often you just find that managers are just given, a bunch of CVs and told to turn up at an interview to interview for somebody into their team, and they've maybe not necessarily had that experience of doing that before and don't know exactly what they should or should not be doing. So yeah, definitely give that consideration too. Okay. Employer branding and candidate experience. So we've kind of touched on, presenting the organisation in the best light to make sure that, we're attracting the best candidates and the right audience to apply for the role, to allow us to take them through the selection process and identify the best candidates. So some thoughts around, how you can go about doing that. I kind of touched on, the company values, the culture, the benefits, the career progression opportunities, and just trying to feed those in through your advert and also through the other kind of touch points. So make sure you're talking about these things that are relevant, and those are the things that individuals are going to be interested in, as well as the role itself. Making sure you are engaging candidates throughout the process, as we've kind of touched on. Not forgetting your unsuccessful candidates. Your reputation isn't just about those that you're employing into the organisation. It's about those who you maybe have had a contact point with your organisation through applying for a post. So making sure you're not just leaving them behind, keeping them engaged and ultimately letting them know if they've not been successful, however appropriate that is. And again, maybe depending on how far along they've got in your selection process as to how you might go about engaging and communicating with unsuccessful candidates. And just reinforcing that employee value proposition. So, what we mean by that is, what are you offering successful candidates? Not just the opportunity to come and work for you in that role, but what does that actually mean for them? It goes beyond the kind of salary and beyond the benefits package. It's the work experience, the experience of the workplace that you're providing. What sort of team are they joining? What sort of culture are they joining? What learning opportunities will be available to them to kind of stretch them, their capabilities? What development opportunities will there be to help kind of engage them throughout their journey with you, and ultimately to make that a lasting journey for the best candidates, which is that retention piece that we're talking about today. Bit more generally thinking about the importance of a positive workplace culture, and I mentioned this is something we support a lot of organisations with, irrespective of where they're at on their journey. Positive workplace culture, as I've said there, is a key driver for engagement, for employee performance, and ultimately for retention. It's based around, or the kind of attributes that we see in an organisation with a positive culture: trust, collaboration, get improved well-being, and that helps to attract like-minded candidates to the organisation when you are recruiting. It's not just about those who are employed in your organisation. Candidates will perceive what the culture's like if they are visiting to attend interviews. Your customers and your clients will perceive what the culture's like when they're interacting with your staff. So it's definitely something to give consideration to and spend some time on. Some of the kind of cornerstones, as I've said there, that we see in organisations with a kind of positive workplace culture, that kind of inclusive dynamic, a safe space for people to kind of speak up, and where voices will be heard, and where people know that their suggestions and concerns are going to be listened to. Transparent decision making. So this isn't about making everything by doing everything by a kind of committee. It's still leadership owning decisions fundamentally, but those being transparent in terms of how we've arrived at those decisions and why they've been made, and that kind of clear organisational vision, and each individual within that knowing what their role is within that, and how they are contributing to ultimately to the success of the organisation. And just the kind of positive behaviours and actions that sit underneath your kind of values as an organisation, making sure that those are role modelled at the top of the organisation and then cascaded down throughout it, and that we're actually feeding that into performance management process, and it's talked about and actively, it's part of the language within the organisation. Grant, can't believe where we're at in terms of time. Just a couple more slides to go through, and then we can see if there's any questions. So just, thinking about moving into the onboarding side of things. So if we've had an offer out to a candidate, just moving through that process, and how do we go about seamlessly onboarding successful candidates? We're having a structured kind of plan, and onboarding plan is always a sensible first step, making sure that is an engaging one for the new person joining, and making sure you've got those touch points from when the offer's made, keeping them engaged if they're working through a notice period, be that 1 month, 3 months or longer, and making sure that continues into their first day when they arrive, and more importantly, or as importantly, beyond that first day. So not just thinking about getting them in, getting them to the desk, to the IT equipment, and showing them a few things, and then kind of leaving them to get on with it. I think important to say here, considering the actual working arrangements, if you're using hybrid and remote working, are you still using the same onboarding process from when you used to just all be in the office 5 days a week? There might be tweaks and changes that need to be made if people are, fully remote or hybrid, for that kind of initial few weeks and the onboarding cycle, and maybe making sure there's more deliberate touch points and communication points with new joiners, and the opportunity for them to meet others within their team or within the wider organisation. Just things that maybe were not necessarily changed despite all the changes that we've seen to many workplaces and operations. That second point there, assigning mentors or buddies to new hires, if we're asked to come in and look at an induction kind of process and an onboarding process, and that's missing, we're speaking to new hires or managers of new hires, or those kind of focus groups and that type of platform to gather the information. This is something that always comes up, that's always something that's desired, and it does work really, really well. So, giving a new joiner a kind of mentor or buddy, somebody that's either within their team or ideally out with their team, to just be able to communicate with on how they're getting on and settling in, and if they don't want to bother their line manager or whomever it might be with a particular query, they've got another source that they can go to. Thinking about the kind of expectations and performance metrics and what the culture of the organisation is. So again, setting people up for success, making sure there's no kind of surprises as they move through that onboarding and those initial weeks and months with the organisation. And I think just that pertains to the kind of last bullet there as well. Just wanted to touch on, managing that probation period, managing that onboarding period in a more structured way. That's something that's coming down the line in terms of the changes to employment law that we're going to see over the next kind of year and a half. So it's a good opportunity now to get into good habits about managing those first few months in a very structured way. And it also just helps the individual feel like they are valued. They've got those regular check-ins, make sure they're getting to grips with the role itself, the team that they're sitting into, the overall organisation, and that they know their own direction of travel and indeed the organisation's one too. And just kind of lastly there, that importance of that kind of talent development as a retention tool. Organisations are, I think, much more tuned into making sure they're providing talent pathways, they're providing development opportunities, and using that as a key retention tool, so that they're actually not having to go out to market and recruit just as much because of all the difficulties that we hear about in attracting the right skills, experience, and individuals to the organisation. So just a few thoughts on how to go about doing that. Thinking about that continuous learning and development environment within the organisation. Blend of on-the-job, formal training, external CPD, lots of learning interventions that can come into play, and it's about combining those rather than just relying on one particular. That's going to engage the individuals as they progress and develop. So encouraging that kind of career growth, and through structured and also, where possible, tailored progression pathways. So it's not a kind of wish list and everything's going to get ticked off for every single individual, but it's just trying to have those conversations with between managers and direct reports about what opportunities they are interested in and how we can make those happen if possible. It's not always about that kind of traditional linear career ladder of promotions and seniority. It's thinking a bit more strategically about the opportunities for somebody to become a bit more of a subject matter expert, or to kind of look at more breadth in their career and add in new skills and things that they can take on to kind of enhance their role, as well as those more promotions for seniority as well. And I think just making sure managers are tabling those conversations, facilitating those growth opportunities, but also that employees are aware that they need to take ownership of their own development. And we've done quite a lot of work recently with a number of clients on growth conversations and making sure, again, line managers are equipped to bring those into performance reviews, but also just more generally, check-ins and chats and making sure they're demonstrating that kind of awareness of individuals' requirements and requests for development in their role. So a few kind of key takeaways here. Touched on the strong recruitment and retention strategy, reducing those risks of bad hires and ultimately the cost that's all going to bring. And when you can make a success of that, the boost that's going to bring to your engagement and ultimately unlocking growth for your organisation. We talked about employer branding and kind of employee value proposition playing a critical role in attracting the right candidates. So no longer thinking about, well, I've got a job and somebody's going to want it. It's really about putting forward the organisation and what you can offer that individual to attract them to join your organisation. Creating inclusive and engaging hiring processes. So, not having those elongated, making sure we're keeping our candidates engaged. And ultimately, that's all going to feed into that successful onboarding and retention. and then thinking about the journey from day one right through to her whenever somebody might move on from the organisation, making sure that they've had the opportunity to learn and develop, and ultimately, that's going to have had a positive impact on your organisation and their time with your organisation, because you've had an engaged person, a productive person. In all likelihood, they've had improved well-being, and so they've not missed as much work as they might otherwise have, and all those other things that feed into that. So thank you. I can't quite believe the time and where we're at, to be honest. And I've spoken for quite a while now, so very happy to hear from anyone.
Many thanks, Neil. That was fantastic. Folks, just a quick reminder, if you get any questions, if you want to either put it in the Q&A, or if you want to raise your hand, we can unmute your mic if you've got any questions you're wanting to pose to Neil. Just while we're maybe waiting on anything coming in, Neil, I suppose from one point of view, just your own experiences, some of the points that were raised throughout the session, there was a part there earlier in the presentation at looking at the kind of existing capabilities within the business. How well do you think businesses are equipped at being able to do that? They'll know their staff, they know who's there and the job roles they're doing, but that kind of drilling down to capabilities where there's maybe an opportunity to kind of recruit and promote from within. What's your experiences of that?
Yeah, it's something, again, as part of this kind of how do we retain our existing team, and how do we kind of develop them to meet the needs of the future. So lots more organisations are conducting those kind of analysis of their current skills and capabilities. I've seen lots of kind of software solutions as well, kind of on the market to kind of help support that. But I think for me, fundamentally, it comes back to conversations and really speaking and listening to the relevant managers, the individuals themselves that are carrying out these roles, and really understanding what kind of skills and capabilities they see, thinking about the future for the organisation, and what direction of travel there is there, and assessing what those needs are, and looking at where those gaps are. So you're supporting that, really asking the right questions and really capturing the right information is very critical to that. And then, pulling all that together in a bit of analysis, and then identifying where those development opportunities are, and how you're going to best plug those ultimately to bring people forward, and bring them up to where you need them to be if there are kind of changes to roles required.
Okay. And just another thing for myself, in terms of you'd mentioned earlier in the session around businesses articulating what they do around diversity, equity, inclusion, well-being. Again, is that something you see a lot of good practice on, or is it something you see that employers quite often are maybe needing a bit of support around being able to articulate that?
Yeah, it's really mixed, and I think that speaks to how diverse the kind of client base is across Connect3, and beyond that, to be honest. So you've got organisations that have invested lots of time and attention, and financial resources into developing policies, developing practices, and embedding those into the organisations. And then you see ones that are just literally at the start of that journey, and I think it's about meeting the organisation where they are, and there's no perfect solution to this side of things. There's a kind of framework, and a legislative framework for things like discrimination, and preventing all of that side of things. But in terms of diversity, it's about having that conversation, opening up the conversation internally, and really making it a safe place for people to have discussions, to learn and to educate themselves on what good looks like, and just kind of identifying what's going to work for them, and what the kind of initiatives that they need to be working on. And allocating responsibilities to the right people to kind of drive that forward. So I think there's far more, certainly in the SME side of things, from my experience, that are maybe just at the very beginning of that journey, or they've maybe put the policy in place, but they're not necessarily doing much beyond that. But I think it starts with recognizing or having that desire to do more, and it's kind of no judgment situation. So those that are thinking about these things and wanting to learn more and understand more and improve their businesses by doing more, that's a great starting point, and we're always happy to get involved and help them, move forward on that journey.
And thank you. Okay, well, we don't have any questions coming through, so can I take the opportunity just to thank you for today's presentation? Really interesting, hopefully valuable to everybody that was on. And can I take the opportunity to thank everyone for joining today's session. We will be running another series of webinars starting as we go into the new financial year, so please keep an eye on them on the Employer Hub on Skills Development Scotland's website. We will circulate the slides that Neil used out to everyone, along with the evaluation at some point as well. But we'll bring today's session to a close and thank you all once again. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.